What is the main goal of a salary negotiation?
To reach a mutually beneficial agreement where you are fairly compensated for your skills, experience, and impact while maintaining a positive relationship with the employer.
Why is researching market rates important before negotiating?
Because it gives you data-backed benchmarks for your role, level, and location so you can justify your ask and avoid underpricing yourself.
Name 3 good sources for market salary data.
1. Public salary sites, e.g., level-style sites, Glassdoor, PayScale. 2. Industry-specific surveys and reports. 3. Conversations with peers/recruiters in similar roles and regions.
What is a compensation range and why does it matter?
A band of possible total compensation, low to high, for a role. Knowing it helps you set realistic targets and recognize when an offer is below, within, or above market.
What is total compensation?
The full value of what you receive, base salary plus bonus plus equity/stock plus benefits, health, retirement, vacation, etc., plus perks, stipends, training, etc.
Why should you clarify your priorities before negotiating?
So you know what matters most, e.g., base pay versus equity versus flexibility versus title, and can trade on less important items to get what you value most.
What is a good first step after receiving an offer?
Thank them, express enthusiasm, ask for the full offer in writing, and request a bit of time to review before responding.
Why is it helpful to have a walk-away number?
It protects you from accepting an offer that does not meet your minimum financial needs or market value, and gives you confidence during negotiation.
What is an anchor in negotiation?
The first specific number or range put on the table that psychologically influences the rest of the negotiation.
Why should you usually avoid anchoring low?
Because low anchors pull the final number down. Starting too low can leave substantial money on the table and is hard to correct later.
How should you answer "What is your current salary?" when possible?
Redirect to your expectations. I prefer to focus on the market rate and the value I bring. Based on my research, I'm targeting X, Y for this role and level.
How can you respond if asked "What are your salary expectations?" early in the process?
Give a researched range tied to the role. Based on my research for similar roles in this market, I'd expect total compensation in the range of X, Y, depending on the full package.
Why is it risky to give a single exact number instead of a range?
A single number can become a ceiling. A range allows room for discussion and signals flexibility while still setting expectations.
What is a good strategy if you truly have no idea about pay for a role?
Ask for their range. I'm still learning the market for this role. Could you share the compensation range you've budgeted so I can respond thoughtfully?
Why is it helpful to practice your negotiation out loud?
Practicing reduces anxiety, improves clarity and confidence, and helps you sound calm and professional instead of reactive.
What is a good opening when countering a salary offer?
Start with appreciation and enthusiasm. Thank you again for the offer, I'm excited about the role. After reviewing the details, I was hoping we could discuss the compensation.
How can you frame a counteroffer using market data?
Based on my research of similar roles in this market and my X years of experience in Y, I was expecting something closer to amount or range. Is there flexibility to move toward that?
Why is silence a powerful tool after making your ask?
Silence creates space for the other party to respond or improve the offer. Filling it nervously can lead you to weaken your own position.
What is bracketing in salary negotiation?
Asking for a number somewhat higher than your true target so that compromises and concessions still land you near your real goal.
How can you politely resist pressure to decide immediately?
I'm very interested, but this is an important decision. Could I have until date to review everything and give you a thoughtful answer?
What is the risk of accepting the first offer immediately?
You may miss out on significant improvements in pay or benefits. Companies often expect some negotiation and leave room in their initial offer.
How does your BATNA relate to salary negotiations?
Your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, other offers, staying, freelancing, etc., determines how much leverage you have and how much risk you can take.
Why does having multiple offers strengthen your negotiating position?
Competing offers increase your leverage, give you concrete comparison points, and make it easier to justify higher compensation.
How can you ethically use another offer to negotiate?
Share high-level details without revealing confidential info. I do have another opportunity at around X total comp, but this role is my top choice if we can get closer to that level.
What is a tactful way to ask if an offer is negotiable?
Is there any flexibility in the compensation package, particularly around base salary or total compensation?
How can you ask for a higher base salary specifically?
Given my experience with relevant achievements, I was hoping we could explore increasing the base salary to target to better reflect the value I'll bring.
What is a good way to negotiate a signing bonus?
If moving the base substantially isn't possible, would you be open to a signing bonus in the range of amount to help bridge the gap?
How can you negotiate equity, stock, in an offer?
Equity is important to me. Is there room to increase the equity component or adjust the vesting schedule so that the total package is more competitive?
What is an example of negotiating non-salary benefits?
If we're constrained on salary, could we discuss additional vacation days, flexible hours, remote work, or a professional development budget?
How can you respond if they say this is our best and final offer, but it seems low?
Clarify and then decide. I appreciate the clarity. To confirm, there's no flexibility on base, bonus, or equity. Then compare against your walkaway and BATNA.
What should you do if an offer is below your minimum?
Politely decline or restate your minimum. Thank you for the offer. Unfortunately, I can't accept below amount, given my obligations and the market for this role. If circumstances change, I'd be happy to reconnect.
Why is it important to stay professional even if you decline?
Reputation and relationships matter. People change companies and roles, and you may interact with them again in the future.
Why is it useful to quantify your impact when negotiating?
Specific metrics, revenue added, costs saved, time reduced, quality improved, make your value concrete and justify higher compensation.
What kind of achievements are most persuasive in salary negotiations?
Results-focused, measurable achievements that are clearly relevant to the role you're applying for.
How can you bring up a recent promotion or increased responsibility when negotiating?
In my current role, I've taken on responsibilities similar to this position, including examples. Given this, I'd expect compensation closer to target.
How can you respond to "we don't usually pay that much for this role"?
I understand. Based on my experience in key areas and the scope of this position, is there any flexibility to revisit the band or adjust title/level to better align with my background?
What is a good way to negotiate a future salary review?
If we move forward at this level, could we agree to a performance-based review in 6 months with the possibility of a compensation adjustment if I meet agreed-upon goals?
Why should you avoid apologizing for negotiating?
Apologizing signals that you're doing something wrong. Negotiation is normal and expected, and you're simply advocating for fair compensation.
What is a confident phrase to use instead of "sorry to ask for more"?
I'd like to discuss whether there's room to bring the compensation closer to my expectations.
Why is it important to keep your tone collaborative, not adversarial?
You'll likely work with these people. A collaborative tone, language, problem solving, helps you get more while building a good long-term relationship.
How can you frame your ask in a collaborative way?
Given how excited I am about contributing to company/mission, I'd love to find a way to make the compensation work for both of us.
What is a red flag if a company becomes angry or hostile when you negotiate?
It may indicate a poor culture, lack of respect, or future difficulties around pay, promotions, and boundaries.
Why is a very opaque or secretive compensation process a red flag?
Lack of transparency can hide inequities, inconsistent pay, and limited growth opportunities.
Why is we pay everyone the same sometimes a red flag?
It can mean there's little room to reward high performance, negotiate fairly, or recognize different levels of experience and impact.
What is concerning about a company that refuses to put the offer in writing?
Verbal promises are hard to enforce. Refusal to document terms is a strong sign of unreliability or potential bait and switch.
Why is pressure to decide immediately a red flag?
Rushing you may be a tactic to prevent comparison, thoughtful review, or outside advice, and can indicate a high-pressure culture.
What might it mean if a company dodges questions about workload or burnout?
They may be hiding unsustainable expectations, poor planning, or a culture that undervalues work-life balance.
Why should you be cautious if a company says you can make it up in bonuses but won't share details?
Vague or discretionary bonuses may never materialize. Without clear targets and history, you can't reliably count them as compensation.
Why is it important to understand vesting schedules for equity?
Vesting affects when you actually earn stock. Long cliffs or backloaded schedules can reduce the real value if you leave early or the company changes.
What is a typical 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff?
You earn 0% for the first year, then 25% vests at 12 months, and the remaining 75% vests monthly or quarterly over the next 3 years.
Why should you ask about refresher equity grants at startups or public companies?
Refresher grants help maintain your ownership over time. Without them, your equity may dilute while your responsibilities grow.
Why is location relevant to salary negotiations?
Pay bands usually account for cost of labor in specific regions. Remote work, relocation, or high-cost cities may significantly change expected compensation.
How can you ask about the internal level or band for your role?
Could you share the level/band this role is mapped to and the typical compensation range for that level here?
Why is negotiating titles sometimes valuable?
Titles affect perceived seniority, future opportunities, and internal politics. A slightly better title can have long-term career benefits even if pay changes little.
What is a good way to request a better title?
Given my background in experience and the scope of responsibilities we discussed, would target title be a better fit for this role?
Why should you keep written records of the negotiation?
Email threads and written confirmations reduce misunderstandings and give you evidence of agreed terms.
What is a good final step once you reach agreement on compensation?
Summarize in writing to confirm we've agreed on a base, bonus, equity, benefits/remote/vacation, and a start date of date. And ensure the official offer letter matches this.
Why is it usually better not to negotiate during the very first screening call?
At that stage you know little about the role and they know little about you. Premature negotiation can box you into a low range or create misalignment.
What is a good response if a recruiter pushes for numbers on the first call?
Comp is important, but I'd love to learn more about the role and expectations first. At a high level, my range for similar roles has been around X, Y total comp. Does that align with your band?
How often is it reasonable to counter in a salary negotiation?
Typically 1 to 2 thoughtful counters. More than that can damage goodwill unless there are major new facts or competing offers.
What is a sign you should stop pushing in a negotiation?
They clearly state they have reached the limit across base, bonus, and equity and explain why. Further pressure risks the relationship without much upside.
Why is it useful to separate people from the problem in negotiations?
It helps you stay calm and collaborative, focusing on solving a shared problem, fair pay, rather than treating the other person as an adversary.
What mindset can reduce anxiety about negotiating?
See negotiation as a normal business conversation about aligning value and compensation, not as begging or conflict.
What is one simple daily habit that can improve your negotiation skills over time?
Practice asking for small things, discounts, deadlines, clarifications, to build comfort with asking and handling no calmly.
In a performance review context, what is a good way to open a compensation discussion?
Over the last year, I've contributed by key achievements. I'd like to discuss how my compensation can better reflect my current impact and responsibilities.
How can you prepare for an internal raise conversation with your manager?
Gather evidence of your achievements, understand internal pay bands, know your target, and schedule a dedicated meeting in advance instead of surprising them.
What is a good way to ask your manager about promotion criteria?
I'd like to work toward the next level. Could we review the expectations for that level and identify concrete goals that would demonstrate I'm ready?
Why is timing important when asking for a raise or promotion?
Raises and promotions are often tied to budget cycles and review periods. Asking at the right time increases your chances of success.
How can you handle "there's no budget right now" in an internal raise discussion?
Ask about timing and alternatives. I understand. When would be a better time to revisit this, and are there other forms of recognition, title, scope, bonus, we can consider in the meantime?
What is a good way to follow up after a not now response on a raise?
Summarize agreed goals and a timeline in writing, then revisit at the agreed date with evidence that you've met or exceeded those goals.
How can you connect your work to business outcomes in an internal negotiation?
Translate tasks into impact. Show how your work improved revenue, reduced costs, mitigated risk, improved customer satisfaction, or enabled strategic goals.
What is a reasonable percentage increase to ask for in a strong internal raise case?
Often in the 5 to 15% range depending on market misalignment, increased responsibilities, and company norms. Larger jumps may require a promotion or role change.
How can you negotiate when changing roles internally, e.g., IC to manager?
Treat it like an external negotiation, research bands, clarify scope changes, and ask how compensation will reflect the new responsibilities and hours.
What should you do before using an external offer to negotiate internally?
Be prepared to accept the external offer if they can't match. Using leverage you're not willing to act on can damage trust.
How can you maintain the relationship if you decide to leave for higher pay?
Thank your manager for their support, explain your decision respectfully, and offer a thoughtful transition plan.
What is one way to handle cultural discomfort around talking about money?
Reframe compensation as a business topic, not a personal one, and practice neutral, factual language about pay.
How can you prepare for cross-cultural differences in negotiation style?
Research norms for that country or company culture, direct versus indirect, hierarchy, views on negotiation, and adapt your tone and approach accordingly.
What is a polite way to push back in a very hierarchical culture?
Use respectful, deferential language. I completely understand your perspective. May I share some data that might support a slightly higher number?
How can you handle a culture where people rarely negotiate?
You can still ask, but emphasize appreciation and modest adjustments. Focus on small, reasonable improvements and frame them as helping you succeed.
Why is it important to align your negotiation with the company's values and mission?
Referencing their mission and values shows you're invested in the organization's success and makes your ask feel more like a partnership.
What extra factors matter when negotiating for remote roles?
Location-based pay policies, home office support, time zones, travel expectations, and whether remote status affects promotion or pay bands.
How can you ask if remote employees are paid differently?
How do you handle compensation for remote employees in different locations? Is pay adjusted based on location or is it role-based?
What is a good question to ask about promotion paths in a remote role?
Do remote employees have the same access to high-impact projects and promotions as those on-site?
How can you address concerns that remote work might limit your visibility?
Negotiate for regular 1:1s, clear goals, and visibility opportunities. I'd like to ensure I stay visible and impactful. Could we agree on regular check-ins and key projects where I can contribute?
What is anchoring high but reasonable in practice?
Choosing a number at the upper end of a realistic market range, supported by data and your achievements, rather than an arbitrary or extreme ask.
How can you respond if they say that number is higher than we expected?
I understand it's at the top of the range. It reflects my experience in key areas and the impact I expect to have in this role. What can we do to get as close as possible to that figure?
What is a concession strategy in negotiation?
Planning in advance what you're willing to give up and in what order so any concessions are deliberate and tied to something you gain in return.
Why should every concession be tied to a trade-off?
If you give ground without getting anything, you train the other side to keep asking. Trades maintain balance and respect.
How can you phrase a conditional concession?
If we keep the base at lower number, could we increase the signing bonus to amount and add an extra week of vacation?
What is a deadline effect in salary negotiations?
As a decision deadline approaches, both sides may become more flexible to reach agreement. Last-minute improvements often happen near the end.
How can you use a deadline without being manipulative?
Share real constraints. I need to make a decision by date because of other timelines. Is there any chance we could finalize the compensation by then?
Why is it important to avoid lying in negotiations?
Dishonesty can backfire, damage your reputation, and even lead to rescinded offers if discovered.
What should you do if you accidentally gave incorrect information during negotiation?
Correct it promptly. I realized I misstated something earlier. To be accurate, correct info. I apologize for the confusion.
What is negotiation fatigue?
When long or complicated negotiations wear people down, making them more likely to accept suboptimal terms just to finish.
How can you protect yourself from negotiation fatigue?
Take breaks, review offers with a trusted friend or mentor, and keep your priorities and walk-away point visible.
What is a healthy way to debrief yourself after a negotiation?
Reflect on what went well, what you'd do differently, what you learned about your market value, and how you felt at each stage.
How can you use past negotiations to improve future ones?
Keep notes on strategies, phrases, data sources, and outcomes, and treat each negotiation as practice for the next.
What is one sign that you negotiated well even if you feel some discomfort?
Both sides feel they stretched a bit but can live with the outcome. Mild discomfort often means you didn't leave obvious value on the table.
How can you respond if a friend or colleague suggests you were greedy for negotiating?
I see negotiation as a normal part of business and a way to align compensation with the value I bring. I also stayed respectful and realistic throughout.
Why is it important to periodically recheck your market value even when not job searching?
Markets change. Staying informed helps you avoid falling far below market and prepares you for opportunities or internal discussions.
What simple checklist can you run before any salary negotiation?
1. Market data gathered. 2. Priorities ranked. 3. Target, stretch, and walkaway numbers defined. 4. Scripts practiced. 5. BATNA clarified. 6. Questions and red flags listed.
How can you approach negotiation during a company-wide hiring slowdown or downturn?
Acknowledge the context. Keep asks reasonable, emphasize long-term value, and consider trading some immediate cash for future review, title, or scope if budgets are tight.
What is one way to negotiate if you are re-entering the workforce after a career break?
Focus on current skills and recent projects, freelance, volunteering, courses, and tie your ask to the role's market rate rather than your time away.
How can you frame frequent job changes so they don't hurt your negotiation?
Explain the positive story, growth, opportunities, company changes, and highlight consistent achievements and impact across roles.
How can you respond to "we need to keep you in line with internal equity"?
I appreciate internal equity. Based on my experience and market data, how close can we get to target while staying consistent with your internal structure?
Why is it risky to accept a big internal counteroffer just to stay?
Research shows many people leave within a year anyway, underlying issues may remain, and relationships can be strained if they feel you had to threaten to leave to be paid fairly.
What should you clarify before accepting an internal counteroffer?
How your new role, responsibilities, and future opportunities will look, and whether the raise is sustainable or a one-off fix.
How can you ask about pay transparency or ranges in regions with pay transparency laws?
Given local transparency requirements, could you share the posted range for this role and where you see me fitting within it?
What is a good question to ask about annual bonus structure?
How is the bonus calculated? What is the target percentage? And how often do people at this level actually hit or exceed target?
For sales roles, what should you ask about OTE, on-target earnings?
Ask about base versus variable split, quota difficulty, attainment history, and whether quotas or territories are likely to change.
Why is it important to ask about clawbacks on bonuses or commissions?
So you know if money can be taken back if a customer churns or if you leave, which affects the real value of variable pay.
What should you clarify about probation periods that affect pay?
Length, conditions for passing, whether pay changes after, and what support you'll get to succeed.
How can you negotiate a relocation package?
Ask about moving costs, temporary housing, travel, visa support, and whether they can add a relocation bonus or reimburse specific expenses.
What is a smart way to ask for professional development support?
Continuous growth is important to me. Is there a budget for conferences, courses, or certifications, and can we include that explicitly in the offer?
How can you respond if a recruiter says the offer is non-negotiable?
I understand. Before I decide, could you help me understand how you arrived at this number and whether there's any flexibility in other parts of the package?
What should you consider before accepting a take it or leave it offer?
Whether it meets your minimums, your BATNA strength, cultural red flags, and how the tone of this interaction predicts future treatment.
How can juniors or interns negotiate without much leverage?
Focus on fairness relative to peers, cost of living, and small but meaningful asks like a modest pay bump, earlier review, or specific learning opportunities.
What is a reasonable way to negotiate when switching careers into a new field?
Except you may start lower in the new field, but still anchor to the market for your new level and highlight transferable skills and achievements.
How can you ask about equity risk for a private company?
Could you share the current valuation, recent funding, dilution expectations, and any historical liquidity events so I can better understand the potential value of the equity?
What is one way to reduce equity risk if you're worried?
Ask for a bit more cash and slightly less equity, or for a smaller cliff and more front-loaded vesting so you earn value sooner.
How can you negotiate around visa or work permit constraints?
Clarify sponsorship details, timelines, and costs, and consider asking for support with legal fees, premium processing, or bridging periods between statuses.
What should you ask about how often compensation bands are updated?
How frequently do you review and adjust compensation bands to reflect market changes and inflation?
How can you raise the impact of inflation in a salary discussion?
Given recent inflation and market shifts, I want to ensure my compensation keeps pace so I can stay focused and committed long term.
What is a good way to ask about equity versus cash trade-offs?
If there's limited room on salary, could we explore different mixes of cash and equity to find a combination that works for both of us?
Why is it valuable to know who has final approval on your compensation?
Understanding the decision maker helps you tailor your case and know when a no is truly final versus just an intermediate constraint.
How can you prepare if you know the company has strict bans but you still want more?
Understand the top of the band, aim near that, and look for value in other dimensions: bonus, equity, title, benefits, scope, review timing.
What is one way to explore scope changes as part of negotiation?
If we expanded the role to include additional responsibility, would that open up a higher band or different title with more compensation?
How can you respond if they say we can't move on base, but we really want you?
Ask about other levers: signing bonus, equity, vacation, remote days, relocation support, or an earlier salary review.
Why is it important to clarify whether the offer is competitive internally as well as externally?
You want to avoid joining far below peers with similar impact, which can limit future raises and create long-term dissatisfaction.
How can you ask whether your offer is aligned with peers at your level?
Is this offer in line with what others at this level and role are earning here? If not, what would it take to close that gap?
What should you ask about how performance ratings affect raises and bonuses?
How do performance ratings translate into raises and bonuses, and what percentage differences are typical between ratings?
How can you negotiate if your base offer is solid but variable pay feels risky?
Ask to shift part of the variable compensation into base or for guarantees in the first year, e.g., guaranteed minimum bonus or draw.
What is a guaranteed draw in sales compensation?
A temporary guaranteed minimum income while you ramp, which may be recoverable or non-recoverable depending on the plan.
Why is it useful to know the historical promotion rate for your level?
It shows how realistic promotion promises are and how long people typically stay at a given level before advancing.
How can you ask about typical time and level before promotion?
On average, how long do people stay at this level before being promoted, and what differentiates those who move faster?
What is a good question to understand how often out-of-cycle adjustments happen?
Do you ever make off-cycle salary adjustments for market corrections or exceptional performance, and how common is that?
How can you negotiate if the company is early stage and cash poor but equity rich?
Aim for enough cash to meet your needs, then negotiate for meaningful equity and clarify vesting, dilution expectations, and possible liquidity paths.
Why should you ask how many shares are outstanding when negotiating equity?
So you can translate the number of shares into a percentage ownership and better understand the potential upside.
What is one way to check whether your equity grant is meaningful?
Compute your percentage ownership and compare it with typical ranges for your role and stage, using public benchmarks where possible.
How can you bring up pay gap concerns, e.g., gender or race, without making it confrontational?
Ask about formal pay equity reviews, transparent bands, and how the company ensures people doing similar work are paid fairly.
What is a good question to ask about pay equity practices?
Do you regularly review compensation for potential pay gaps across gender, race, or other groups, and how do you address any gaps you find?
How can you respond if you discover you are underpaid relative to new hires?
Share data calmly. Based on what I've learned about current offers for similar roles here and my contributions, I'd like to discuss bringing my compensation closer to market and internal parity.
What should you prepare if you plan to ask for a mid-year market adjustment?
Evidence of under-market pay, internal comparables if known, your achievements, and a clear target number or range.
How can you safely benchmark against peers without breaching confidentiality?
Use ranges and anonymized discussions, and rely on public data plus any transparent internal band information rather than sharing specific colleagues' pay.
What is one way to keep negotiation emotions from derailing you?
Write down your key points and numbers in advance, and refer to them during the conversation instead of improvising under stress.
How can you reset a negotiation that is becoming tense?
Slow down, acknowledge the tension, and refocus on shared goals. I want to make sure this works well for both of us. Maybe we can step back and look at the constraints and options together.
What is a good way to ask for time to think after a tough counteroffer?
Thank you for walking me through this. It's a lot to consider. Could I take a day to think it over and get back to you by time?
How can you incorporate mentorship and growth opportunities into your negotiation?
Ask to include mentorship, clear growth plans, or access to key projects and leaders as part of the overall package.
What is a concrete way to ask for structured mentorship?
Would it be possible to set up a regular mentorship arrangement with role/senior person, or to participate in a formal mentoring program here?
How can you prepare if you're negotiating for a fully remote role from a lower cost region?
Anchor closer to the company's typical range for the role, then be ready to discuss how they handle geo-based pay and why your impact is comparable.
What is a good way to ask whether geo adjustments are reversible if you relocate?
If I relocate to a different region later, how would that affect my compensation? Would it be adjusted up or down based on the new location?
How can you negotiate when moving from contractor to full-time employee?
Compare total value, day rate versus salary plus benefits plus stability, and use your proven track record with the company to justify a strong offer.
What should you clarify when converting from hourly to salaried?
Expected hours, overtime expectations, exempt/non-exempt status, and whether the salary truly compensates for the time and flexibility required.
How can you bring up the emotional cost of a difficult current role when negotiating a new one?
Frame it in business terms, burnout risk, sustainability, and why fair compensation and boundaries are key to long-term performance.
What is a good question to ask about how your manager can advocate for your compensation?
When compensation decisions are made, how do you typically advocate for your team, and what information from me would help you make the strongest case?
How can you negotiate if you're joining a team where others are much more senior?
Emphasize your growth potential, ask for clear development plans, and negotiate for mentorship, training, and a fair starting point with room to grow.
How can you handle a situation where you sense bias may be affecting the offer?
Stick to data and impact, ask about pay equity processes, and, if necessary, decide whether the culture feels aligned with your values.
What is a tactful way to ask if anyone else is at your proposed compensation level?
For someone with my experience and scope, is this level of compensation typical here, or would I be an outlier?
How can you negotiate scope down instead of pay up if needed?
If we need to keep the compensation at this level, could we narrow the role to focus on subset of responsibilities so expectations and pay remain aligned?
What's a good question to understand expectations for availability outside normal hours?
How often do people in this role need to work evenings or weekends, and is that time compensated or recognized in any way?
How can you pre-negotiate boundaries around on-call or overtime?
Clarify rotation, compensation, compensatory time off, and escalation expectations before accepting.
What should you ask about how your compensation compares across offices if the company is global?
For this role and level, is compensation standardized globally, or does it vary significantly by office or region?
How can you use written summaries to subtly strengthen your negotiation position?
After each conversation, send a concise recap of what was discussed and any tentative agreements. reinforcing your professionalism and creating a record.
What is a good way to ask about internal mobility and its impact on pay?
How does internal mobility work here? And when people move to new teams or roles, how is their compensation typically adjusted?
How can you negotiate when your ideal role is slightly different from the one offered?
Propose a tailored scope, describe the responsibilities you'd like, how they benefit the company, and how that scope supports your target compensation.
What is one way to avoid anchoring yourself too low when asked for your range?
Research market data first, set your internal target and walk-away numbers, and only share a range that you'd genuinely be happy to accept.
How can you bring up competing non-monetary benefits from another offer?
Another opportunity I'm considering includes benefit. Is there anything comparable we could add or adjust here to keep things balanced?
What's a useful question to ask about how often people get promoted from your prospective team?
Over the last couple of years, how many people on this team have been promoted, and what did they do to get there?
How can you negotiate when the role is unique and there's little direct market data?
Look for closest comparable roles, focus on the business impact and scarcity of your skill set, and use internal bands plus broader benchmarks to triangulate a fair range.
What should you do if you realize mid-call that you anchored too low?
You can adjust later. After reflecting and doing more research, I realized the range I mentioned was conservative. Based on the responsibilities we discussed, I'd now be targeting higher range.
How can you prepare a short value pitch to use during negotiation?
Summarize in 3 to 4 sentences your most relevant achievements, strengths, and how they map directly to the role's key goals.
What is a simple structure for that value pitch?
Here's what I've done, past results, here's what I'm great at, strengths, and here's how that helps you, specific value to the new role/company.
What is a good question to ask if an offer is later reduced or changed?
Could you help me understand what changed between the original offer and this version, and whether there's any room to revisit the original terms?
How can you respond if an offer is rescinded but you still want to keep the relationship?
Thank them for the opportunity, express understanding of their constraints, and leave the door open. If circumstances change, I'd be glad to reconnect.
What should you clarify if your role is grant-funded or project-funded?
Duration of funding, renewal likelihood, what happens when funding ends, and whether there are internal transfer or redeployment options.
How can you negotiate in environments with fixed public sector pay scales?
Focus on step placement, starting grade, bonuses, stipends, location, and non-monetary benefits like schedule, training, and responsibilities.
What is a good way to ask where you'll land on a fixed pay scale?
Given my experience, at which step or level on your pay scale would I likely start, and is there flexibility to recognize prior experience?
How can unions affect salary negotiation?
Unions may set standardized pay and progression. Negotiation often shifts toward placement in the scale, assignments, and working conditions.
What is a useful question to ask if a union contract applies?
Is this role covered by a collective bargaining agreement, and if so, how does that agreement define pay, raises, and promotion opportunities?
How can you negotiate when a recruiter says, "This is above our midpoint already"?
Acknowledge it and return to impact. Explain why your background justifies being near the top of band or ask about other levers if base truly can't move.
How can you ask whether there is any discretionary room beyond formal bands?
I understand the band limits. Is there ever any discretion for exceptional candidates, perhaps via sign-on, equity, or a different level?
What is a good strategy when you strongly prefer one offer but another pays more?
Be transparent at a high level and see if your preferred company can close some of the gap while emphasizing fit and long-term commitment.
How can you phrase that situation to your preferred employer?
I have another offer at around higher amount, but this role is my top choice for long-term fit. Is there any way we could move closer to that level?
What should you do before accepting a lower paying offer for non-monetary reasons?
Be very explicit with yourself about the trade-offs and ensure the lower pay still meets your needs and doesn't create unsustainable stress.
How can you ask for a written breakdown of total compensation?
Could you share a written breakdown of base, bonus targets, equity, with number of shares, benefits, and any other components so I can review the full picture?
What is a good question to clarify how raises are budgeted at the company level?
How is the annual raise budget set, and how much room do managers typically have to differentiate based on performance or market?
How can you negotiate if you expect rapid responsibilities growth in the first year?
Ask for a planned checkpoint. Given how quickly this role may grow, could we schedule a compensation review at 6 to 9 months tied to agreed milestones?
What should you clarify about titles like lead or principal when negotiating?
Ask how they map to internal levels, responsibilities, and bands, and whether they are commonly given or reserved for rare cases.
How can you ask whether a title is recognized consistently across the company?
Is this title used consistently across teams for similar scope and level, or is it unique to this group?
What's a useful question to ask about equity refresh criteria?
How do you decide who receives equity refresh grants, how large they are, and how often they're awarded?
How can you protect yourself if a company is in obvious financial distress?
Negotiate for stronger cash guarantees, shorter cliffs, clear severance terms if possible, and be realistic about risk versus reward.
What is a good way to ask about severance without sounding pessimistic?
For senior roles, do you typically have any standard severance practices if there are restructurings or role eliminations down the line?
How can you handle a situation where the recruiter is friendly but has little decision power?
Treat them as an ally, provide them with clear justifications and ranges, and ask who ultimately decides so your case can be presented effectively.
What is a tactful way to ask who else will be involved in compensation decisions?
Aside from you, who will be involved in finalizing the compensation, and is there anything I can provide that would help them make a decision?
What is one way to keep track of multiple concurrent negotiations without confusion?
Use a simple spreadsheet or notes with columns for role, company, stage, ranges, pros/cons, and key dates so you don't mix numbers or promises.
How can you plan your communication so companies feel respected during parallel negotiations?
Be transparent about decision timelines, respond promptly, and avoid ghosting. Give each company a clear yes/no by the agreed date.
How can you prepare differently for negotiating with a founder versus a corporate recruiter?
With founders, emphasize impact, runway, and equity. With recruiters, focus on bands, process, and getting your case documented for decision makers.
What is a good question to ask a founder about how they see your role?
If I do this job exceptionally well in the next 12 to 24 months, how will the company be different because I was here?
How can you use that answer in your negotiation?
Tie your compensation ask directly to that vision, highlighting how your skills and track record make that outcome more likely.
How can you negotiate if your current employer gives a preemptive raise when you start interviewing?
Thank them, treat it as a data point, and still complete your external process so you can compare total opportunities before deciding.
What is one risk of revealing external interview activity too early to your current employer?
They may react defensively, change your responsibilities, or question your commitment before you have concrete options.
How can you keep your options open when you're unsure whether to leave?
Negotiate respectfully with both current and prospective employers, focusing on facts and fit, and avoid burning bridges on either side.
What's a useful question to ask about pay for performance cultures?
Can you share examples of how high performers' compensation has grown over the last few years compared with average performers?
How can you negotiate if a company heavily emphasizes mission over money?
Acknowledge mission fit. Then calmly state your financial needs and market value so you don't sacrifice long-term stability.
What is a good way to set boundaries if a company questions your focus on pay?
I care about both meaningful work and sustainable compensation. Getting the financial side right helps me fully commit and do my best work.
How can you prepare for negotiation right after a layoff?
Stabilize your finances, clarify your minimums, practice explaining the layoff succinctly, and avoid desperation-based decisions.
How can you frame a layoff in a neutral, professional way?
My role was impacted as part of a broader restructuring affecting number/percentage of roles, not tied to individual performance.
What is a good question to ask about how often compensation is benchmarked against the market?
How frequently do you review your compensation ranges against external market data, and what happens when you find gaps?
How can you respond if told we haven't updated our bands in a while?
Use that as support for your ask, share current market data and explain why an adjustment would bring the role in line with today's market.
What is a useful question to ask about internal versus external offer differences?
Are new hires for this role typically brought in at similar compensation to internal promotions, or is there a gap?
How can you negotiate if you're internally promoted but offered less than an external hire would get?
Highlight your proven impact, savings on ramp-up time, and loyalty, and use external benchmarks to argue for parity with typical external offers.
How can you handle a company that insists on knowing your previous salary despite laws or policies?
Reiterate your preference. I'd really like to focus on the value of this role and market rates. For this position, I'm targeting a range of X, Y.
What is one way to practice saying higher numbers without flinching?
Say them out loud multiple times beforehand, in full sentences, until they feel normal and you can deliver them calmly.
How can you use a friend or mentor in your negotiation prep?
Role-play the conversation, have them push back realistically, and ask for feedback on your tone, clarity, and numbers.
What is a good way to check if you're under-asking relative to your market?
Compare your target with multiple data sources and with trusted peers in similar roles. If you're consistently at the low end, consider raising your range.
How can you incorporate cost of living differences when comparing offers across cities?
Normalize salaries using cost of living indices or calculators to see which offer gives you better real purchasing power.
What is a useful question to ask about future geographic moves in comp?
If I needed to relocate in the future, how would that typically affect role expectations and compensation for someone at this level?
How can you respond if a company says we don't negotiate but you suspect they sometimes do?
Politely ask if there are any rare exceptions for strong alignment or exceptional fit, then decide if the stance itself is a cultural signal for you.
What is one way to gracefully accept an offer after negotiating?
Express appreciation and enthusiasm, briefly acknowledge the adjustments made, and confirm key terms in writing.
How can you negotiate if your role combines multiple job descriptions, e.g., Dev plus PM?
Clarify the blended scope, compare to each market role separately, and argue that your compensation should reflect the higher or combined value.
What is a good question to ask when your role is player coach, IC plus manager?
Roughly what percentage of my time will be IC work versus people leadership, and how is that mix reflected in level and compensation?
How can you negotiate when stepping into your first formal management role?
Emphasize your leadership track record, ask how manager bands differ from IC bands, and aim for compensation that reflects added responsibility and risk.
What should you clarify about bonus metrics that you don't directly control?
Who sets them, how realistic they are, how often they change, and whether you'll have input or visibility into the levers that drive them.
How can you negotiate if your offer is good but benefits are weak, e.g., healthcare, retirement?
Acknowledge the strong salary, then ask for targeted improvements or stipends to offset weaker benefits where possible.
What is a useful question to ask about retirement contributions?
Do you offer matching or profit-sharing contributions to retirement accounts? And what are the typical percentages and vesting rules?
How can you negotiate around long benefit waiting periods, e.g., healthcare starts after 90 days?
Ask if they can shorten the waiting period or provide a temporary stipend to cover interim costs.
What is a good way to ask about salary band overlap between levels?
Do compensation bands for adjacent levels overlap, and if so, how do you decide where someone with my background should fall?
How can you use overlapping bands to argue for a higher number?
If your experience sits at the high end of one level or low end of the next, argue you should be placed near the top of the lower band or bottom of the higher band.
How can you negotiate when you're slightly underqualified on paper?
Lean on adjacent experience, fast learning examples, and a willingness to prove yourself, while still anchoring to fair market for the role.
What is a good way to propose a trial period linked to a raise?
Would you consider starting at X with an agreement to revisit compensation to Y after timeframe if I meet specific, written goals?
How can you negotiate in academia or research roles with rigid pay scales?
Focus on startup funds, reduced teaching loads, research support, title, and clear paths to promotion or tenure rather than salary alone.
What should you ask about startup or research funds in academic offers?
What is the expected startup package for this role? How flexible is it, and what can it be used for? Staff, equipment, travel, etc.
How can freelancers apply salary negotiation concepts to setting day rates?
Research market rates, define a target range and walk away, quantify business value, and be ready to negotiate scope, timelines, and payment terms instead of just rate.
What is a useful question to ask clients about budget when freelancing?
Do you have a budget range in mind for this project so I can suggest options that fit?
How can you handle a client who says, "We can't afford your rate"?
Offer scope or phase adjustments, not deep discounts. Reduce deliverables or timeline rather than slashing your rate below sustainable levels.
What is a good way to ask for better payment terms as a freelancer?
To manage cash flow, I typically work with X% upfront and Y% on milestones or delivery. Would that work for you?
How can you adapt your negotiation style when dealing with very data-driven companies?
Bring clear benchmarks, structured arguments, and, if possible, simple spreadsheets showing market comparisons and your impact.
What is a useful question to ask data-driven companies about how they calibrate offers?
Which data sources or frameworks do you use to set compensation for this role and level?
How can you leverage certifications or rare skills in negotiation?
Quantify how they reduce risk or time to value for the employer, and show how similar specialized profiles are compensated in the market.
What should you do if you discover a major mistake in the written offer, e.g., wrong salary, in your favor?
Raise it immediately and clarify the intended terms. Protecting your integrity is more valuable long-term than a short-term windfall.
How can you bring up a competing counteroffer without sounding threatening?
I want to be transparent that I do have another offer at around amount, but I'm very interested in this role and would prefer to make this work if we can get closer.
What is a healthy way to think about walking away from a negotiation?
As choosing alignment with your needs and values, not as failure. Sometimes the best outcome is realizing an offer isn't right for you.
How can you prepare to negotiate after receiving an exceptional performance review?
Collect concrete examples from the review, quantify your impact, and connect that directly to a request for a raise or expanded responsibilities.
What is a good way to open a raise conversation right after a strong review?
Given the impact we discussed in my performance review, I'd like to talk about how my compensation can better reflect that level of contribution.
How can you handle it if your manager agrees you deserve more but says their hands are tied?
Ask what specific constraints exist, what timeline or process could change things, and whether they can advocate on your behalf with decision makers.
What is a useful follow-up question in that situation?
What would need to be true for a raise to be approved, and how can we work together toward that?
How can you negotiate during a reorganization when roles are changing?
Clarify new responsibilities, reporting lines, and expectations, then ask how compensation will be updated to match the expanded or altered scope.
What is a good question to ask during a reorg about pay?
With these new responsibilities, will there be any adjustments to level or compensation to reflect the broader scope of the role?
How can you protect yourself when accepting a role with vague responsibilities?
Ask for a written description, clarify priority areas, and, if possible, anchor compensation and future reviews to concrete outcomes.
What should you clarify about non-compete or non-solicit clauses?
Duration, geography, what types of roles or companies are restricted, and how this might affect your future earning ability.
How can you ask about intellectual property, IP, ownership in a new role?
Can you clarify what IP I create on my own time versus on company time, and how that's treated under your standard agreement?
What is a good way to bring up equipment or home office support in a remote role?
For remote employees, do you provide equipment or a home office stipend for things like monitors, chairs, or internet upgrades?
How can you negotiate better tools or budget to support your performance?
Explain how specific tools will improve your productivity or quality and ask to include them as part of the overall offer or onboarding plan.
What is a useful question to ask about travel expectations and reimbursement?
How often do people in this role travel, who approves it, and how are expenses handled and reimbursed?
How can you negotiate if travel expectations are high?
Ask for clear travel policies, additional compensation or time off for heavy travel, and the ability to cluster trips to reduce disruption.
What should you clarify about probationary performance expectations?
Specific metrics, behaviors, or milestones that define success, how feedback will be given, and what support you'll receive.
How can you reduce risk if asked to relocate before a probation period is complete?
Ask for relocation support, clarity on termination scenarios, and, if possible, written assurances or severance terms if things don't work out.
What is a good way to ask about stock option strike price and tax implications?
Could you share the current strike price, how it's determined, and whether you can provide general guidance or resources on the tax treatment?
How can you prepare yourself for the emotional swings during a long negotiation process?
Expect ups and downs, keep notes of facts instead of ruminating, and regularly revisit your priorities, BATNA, and walk-away point.
What is one way to avoid overreacting to small moves in an offer?
View each change as part of a larger package and timeline, and evaluate offers holistically instead of focusing on single components in isolation.
How can you use journaling to improve your future salary negotiations?
After each negotiation, write down what you did, how you felt, what worked, what didn't, and what you'd change next time.
What is a helpful mindset shift if you tend to feel guilty asking for more?
Remember that you're trading value for value. Advocating for fair pay is part of being a responsible professional, not a personal favor.
What is a common mistake candidates make when first seeing an offer?
Reacting immediately, accepting or rejecting, without pausing to review the full package, do comparisons, or prepare a negotiation plan.
How can you avoid sounding defensive when pushing back on an offer?
Use curious, open language, can you help me understand, and tie your request to data and impact rather than emotion.
What is a simple structure for a counteroffer email?
1. Appreciation and enthusiasm. 2. Brief recap of fit/impact. 3. Clear, specific ask with rationale. 4. Collaborative closing line.
What is one example of a strong collaborative closing line?
I'd love to find a way to make this work for both of us and am hopeful we can get closer on these points.
How can you politely decline to share another offer's exact details?
Out of respect for the other company's confidentiality, I can't share specifics, but the range is approximately XY.
What's a good question to ask if you're unsure how titles map to responsibilities?
For people with this title here, what does success look like day to day and over the first year?
How can you keep your negotiation notes organized during back and forth?
Maintain a single document with dated entries summarizing each conversation, numbers discussed, and open questions.
What is a good way to sanity check your ask before sending it?
Ask, would I feel comfortable explaining this request to a trusted mentor and backing it up with data? If yes, it's likely reasonable.
How can you respond if a recruiter says, "We really don't want compensation to be a blocker"?
I appreciate that. To make this a clear yes for me, I'd need to be closer to target or range. Is there room to move in that direction?
What is a useful way to think about leverage in negotiations?
Your combination of alternatives, scarcity of your skills, timing, and how costly it would be for the company to restart the search.
How can you increase your leverage before negotiating?
Apply broadly, advance multiple processes, strengthen your interview performance, and gather strong references or portfolios.
What is one benefit of delaying compensation specifics until later in the process?
Once they're more invested in you as the top candidate, they may have more willingness to stretch on compensation.
How can you avoid accidentally negotiating against yourself?
State your ask clearly, then stop talking and wait for their response instead of quickly offering a lower fallback.
What is a good way to respond if they counter with a small increase that's still below your minimum?
I appreciate the movement. Unfortunately, it's still below what I can accept given my market research and obligations. Is there any possibility of getting closer to minimum?
How can you use if-then statements in negotiation?
Tie your flexibility to specific conditions. If we can get the base to X, then I'd be comfortable being more flexible on Y.
What is a useful question to ask about long-term earning potential in a role?
Over the next 3 to 5 years, what does compensation growth typically look like for someone who performs strongly in this role?
How can you check whether you're over-fixating on salary alone?
List total comp components and non-monetary factors, learning, brand, network, lifestyle, and rate each on importance to you.
What is a healthy way to handle regret over a past negotiation you wish you'd done differently?
Treat it as a lesson, extract specific insights, and commit to applying them next time instead of dwelling on the past.
How can you practice negotiation skills outside of job offers?
Negotiate deadlines, project scopes, prices for services, or everyday purchases, focusing on calm asks and collaborative framing.
What is one question you can ask yourself to decide if a negotiation was good enough?
Did I prepare, advocate clearly for myself, and stay aligned with my values and minimums, even if the outcome wasn't perfect?
What is a common myth about salary negotiation that holds people back?
The myth that good candidates don't need to negotiate. In reality, negotiation is a normal professional skill and widely expected.
Why is "they'll be offended if I negotiate" usually false?
Most hiring managers and recruiters see reasonable negotiation as standard, not personal. Offense usually comes from tone, not the act of asking.
What is one way to reframe nerves before a negotiation call?
Tell yourself you're having a business conversation between equals about aligning value and pay, not asking for a personal favor.
How can you prepare a 1 to 2 sentence market data script?
Based on data from sources, for roles like this in location/level, a typical range is XY, which is why I'm targeting that area.
What is a simple script for stating your target range confidently?
Given my experience in area and the scope we discussed, I'm targeting a total compensation range of X, Y.
What is a simple script for asking about flexibility without naming a number yet?
Before I share a specific range, could you let me know what band you have budgeted for this role?
How can you gracefully pause if you're caught off guard by a question?
That's a good question. Let me think for a moment so I can give you a thoughtful answer.
What is a useful breathing technique to reduce anxiety mid-negotiation?
Take one slow breath in for 4 counts, hold for 4, and exhale for 4 while the other person is speaking or after you've made your point.
How can you practice responses to tough questions without a real offer?
Write a list of challenging questions, current salary, lowball offers, we can't go higher, and role-play answers out loud with a friend or by recording yourself.
What is one benefit of writing your negotiation scripts down?
It helps you refine your wording, remember key points, and avoid rambling under pressure.
How can you use flashcards like these during a real negotiation process?
Review a small subset before calls, e.g., scripts, red flags, BATNA reminders, to keep key concepts fresh and automatic.
What is a good question to ask yourself before deciding to walk away?
If I say yes to this, will I feel respected and fairly treated 6 months from now, or resentful?
How can you sanity check whether you're over-negotiating a minor difference?
Compare the difference in annual or monthly take-home to the overall benefits and career upside. If it's tiny, it may not be worth major friction.
What is one way to avoid sending overly long negotiation emails?
Draft freely, then edit down to a few short paragraphs that clearly state appreciation, rationale, and a specific ask.
How can you keep your tone warm in writing while still being firm?
Combine positive language, excited, appreciate, with clear statements of your needs, I'd need, I'm targeting, and avoid apologizing.
What is a good rule of thumb for how many major points to negotiate at once?
Focus on 1 to 3 key items. Too many simultaneous requests can feel unfocused and harder to approve.
How can you sequence multiple asks to increase your chances?
Start with the most important, usually base or total comp. Then, once that's settled, explore secondary items like start date or vacation.
What is a simple checklist for the day you accept an offer?
Confirm final terms in writing, review the official letter, clarify start date and onboarding steps, and thank everyone who helped you in the process.
How should you behave after accepting an offer you negotiated hard?
Be gracious and professional, show enthusiasm, and then shift focus to delivering strong performance to validate their investment.
What is a healthy way to debrief yourself after everything is finalized?
Review what you did well, what you'd tweak next time, and update your personal playbook so each negotiation builds on the last.